what's up, everybody? Hi, my name is Carlos Eduardo Espina, and I'm really excited to be here. This is my first live on Substack. It's the first time I really do, anything of substance on Substack, so this is really awesome. For those of you who don't know me, like I said, my name is Carlos. I've would call myself the most followed Latino activist, content creator in the entire country. I have over 12.5 million followers on TikTok, around 3.5 million on Facebook, and another 1.5 million on Instagram. I make content about immigration, politics, social issues, news, but all in Spanish. And so now I'm starting here on Substack, and my friend Adrian is trying to help me out grow on this platform because I think it's just so important to use this platform specifically, because what I've noticed with other platforms, with a lot of the work that I do, is there is a degree of censorship. You can't show certain things, you can't say certain things, and you're always beholden to the algorithm. Where I've heard from other people who are on Substack that here's a great place to, just really be honest and show things how they're really going on in this country, which are not very good, as we're going to talk about shortly. So yeah, I created this page, and then we're doing this live here with Adrian to hopefully reach more people. And then my goal is to continue, posting more and more, doing more lives, newsletters, and whatever else is done here on Substack and connect with other people. Pero yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Now, Adrian, if you want to say some words, and then we can take
Yeah.
it from there.
Yeah, Adrian Carrasquillo. I run the national immigration newsletter for the Bulwark. And look, it's been a busy, crazy, hectic, fast-paced year when it comes to immigration policy, when it comes to the mass deportation effort, and when it comes to the aftermath of what's going on when you go beyond criminals and you start going into communities. So we're going to talk about that. And for folks who do not know Carlos, I wrote about him as one of the huge influencers, and just like, I don't know how Carlos feels about this word, and we can talk more about it, but like, I think people sometimes think influencer and they think that that's sort of less than, or that's some sort of like little fake artificial thing. Carlos is super respected among immigrants, among folks in the community. They go to him, they DM him, they tell him, hey, look, my family member was taken. Or I remember, and we can talk about it more in depth, but just sort of as like an introduction, I remember him in group chats and people reaching out on WhatsApp and including him in group chats, the family of people who were sent to Guantanamo Bay. I mean, this is serious. This is a big deal. And frankly, in many ways, it's the role that journalists have played throughout the years, right? So just, we know the importance of respected voices, trusted messengers, especially at a time where trust is low in media, right? And we can get into that. I mean, but anyway, my point that I wanted to make is, like, if you don't know who Carlos is, he's just an incredibly potent person who influences a lot of people, but is on these platforms, has huge followings, and I'm just really happy to be able to jump on your first live and for us to talk about what's going on with immigration in this country.
Yeah, and I think we can take it from that point, because there's something really interesting you mentioned about, like, what is journalism nowadays and who's a journalist? And that's a question I always get asked. I personally don't consider myself to be a journalist. I think there are certain standards to follow and all that, but I do think there is an aspect of journalism in what I do. And what do I mean by that? Especially under this Trump administration, many of the biggest injustices that have come out have been because community members, just pull out their phone and start recording, and then they send those videos to people like me, people like you, who can then amplify them. Just the other day, what happened when they arrested a U.S. citizen in Pico Rivera, California, that became like national news, but the actual catalyst of how that became news was because a community member was recording on their phone, just basically showing what's going on. And I think it's so important nowadays for all of us to understand, especially under this administration, we all have that journalistic duty that if we see something going on in the moment, to pull out our phone, to record it, to share it, to amplify it. And so I think I've gotten really, I would say, efficient at being able to sort through what people send me, because, as you mentioned, millions of people follow me. It's to the point where I'll go outside in any like Latino neighborhood or Latino store or whatever here, and people ask me for pictures and they talk to me. And that also is translates to people sending me information, sending me tips, sending me videos that I'm able to then use, on my platforms to really show what's going on. And that's why I'm also happy to be here on Substack, because I found you can kind of just post stuff as it is here, as opposed to like, the other day I posted something on TikTok and they take it down. And I'm like, because I'm showing firearms, and I'm like, well, it's not my fault that Border Patrol is now going around with, long rifles and threatening people. Like, that's just the reality. So I
No.
can't show it because the algorithm or the community guidelines go against that. But I'm not it doesn't make sense. So I think it's really important not only for us to be journalists every day and every moment, but at the same time to have these spaces where we can actually show the truth without having to, chop it up or censor it, or, just really show
Yeah.
what's going on.
Yeah, and we can get into LA next, but I do want to highlight what you said, which is that it now seems like it was 2 years ago, but
Mm.
right before the administration, they had already won. But before the inauguration, I just wrote about like, is there going to be this proliferation of videos? Like, because that has happened in the past where there people, and we've seen this with law enforcement, attacking people throughout the years, things like that, where people will take out their phone and there's also been some pushback from the administration, from ICE. It's not always that immigrants are comfortable taking out their phone because they might get in trouble or they might get attacked by members of ICE and things like that. So it's I think you're right. I think it is so critical because some of those stories that we see reach that next level of amplification. Unfortunately, the unvarnished reality of a mother crying as she's being taken away from her kids, as we saw in videos in San Antonio, that when they started showing up to courthouses and they started
Yeah.
having immigration judges expedite cases to dismiss them so ICE agents could jump on members of the community who are in court, who have jobs, right? So it's just insane. But when you see these videos, sometimes people need to be sort of shaken out of the doldrums of, oh, well, they're getting criminals, or, oh, well, yeah. I don't love, we'll see in polls, we'll see in focus. I don't love what Trump is doing, but how he's doing it. But I think I support that he's doing it. And then you have to show what's really happening. And I think we saw that with LA. Carlos, I was, like everybody, right? We're blown away by what's going on, and I guess what I wanted to start as an intro to this, and happy to go wherever you want after, is that like what I found with Los Angeles in covering the mass deportation stuff throughout the country. The example I used is if you're an undocumented immigrant in the
Yeah.
South, if you live in one of these red cities in a red state, they always say undocumented immigrants are in the shadows.
Mhm.
You kind of live a life more maybe in the shadows because you drive to work and you drive home. And as people told me, there's not a lot of allies in those places. I've called immigration organizations. I don't want to name, the particular type of organization, but I've called different places in the South and they're like, we're not doing immigration work. We're not talking about it because it's going to put our other work in danger. So in the South and in some of these places, there just feels like there's this constant, sort of all of them against a few immigrants, right? That's not the case in LA. There are, I think it was like 500,000 people that are in mixed status families. There are undocumented immigrants in general are the lifeblood of Los Angeles. So that's why I wrote that like this was always going to be a fight in Los Angeles because they said, wait a second, you're outside of Home Depot, you're raiding a garment district. I spoke
Yeah.
with a woman whose father had been here 27 years and he's a worker and he had raised all the daughters who are US citizens and they take him away. And so that's why people in LA said, you're taking away my family, my friends, my neighbors. And that's why they came out to fight, which led to this violent response. And
Yeah.
what did you see when LA
Well,
popped up?
no, well, I have a bit of a, I guess, maybe controversial take on, I guess this moment and what we should expect from other communities. I tell Latinos, we shouldn't expect other communities, to come help us because we put ourselves in this situation. The polls show that 47% of our community voted for Donald Trump. So if there's anyone to blame, it's ourselves. We should be the ones, obviously we appreciate support from other people and all that, but we can't expect other communities to come and save us when we're the ones that put ourselves in this problem in the first place. And many people get uncomfortable with that. We're like, oh, well, because I voted for Trump, but not for this. I voted for something else. I'm like, no, he said this on the campaign trail, and 47% of Latinos, went out and still voted for him. And then
Mhm.
there's the other side, the people who can't vote are the ones who are being targeted. But the reality is, I mean, and I speak to people every single day, there's so many, mixed status families who had children who voted for Donald Trump. No, I mean, there was a case that's going viral right now about this daughter who's like, she goes and makes a video that her dad's detained by ICE and he's about to be deported and she doesn't know what to do. And then it came out later that she was a Trump supporter. So people are like, well, I mean, you're expecting other people to come to your rescue, but at the same time, I
Mhm.
think as Latinos, we first have to hold each other accountable and say, before we expect, the Black community or the Asian community or whoever it is to come and save us, we need to understand that, I mean, we have to hold, your tío y tu tía, like all these family members. I mean, not in my family. I don't have any Trump supporters in my family, but I know so many Latinos who have an uncle who voted for Trump. They have a brother who voted for Trump. I mean, it's just and I saw it more than ever this past election. So that's my, I guess, feedback to Latinos.
Yeah.
We need to hold each other accountable first
Yeah.
before we come asking like, hey, I'm mad, because there was a whole thing on TikTok. Why are, this community or that community, why are they not standing up for us? I'm like, well, to be fair to them, like they're not the ones who put us in this situation. I mean, Black women voted what, 95% for Harris. We're the ones who voted, us being especially Latino men, who voted 50, 60% for Trump. So I mean, I think it starts with us. And then how do we not make this mistake going forward? And then how do we build coalitions that actually,
Mm.
are make sense? I mean, that's been my biggest frustration, especially as a content creator, where I just see the narrative shift, like in the comment section. Before the election, it was, oh, Carlos, you're a sellout. You're just trying to scare people. Kamala paid you to endorse her, this, and that. Trump's not going to do anything bad. Then now the comments are like, oh shit, we messed up. And it's just sad to see, but it's the reality. I mean, we got to hold each other accountable.
I love where you took the conversation, and this is just such a major conversation among Latinos, but among Democrats and among people trying to figure out how we fix this. So
Yeah.
let's start with what you said. Look, I do hear what you're saying on holding people accountable. When I share videos and on Instagram, and I'll share, like you said, those videos, they go viral. A Trump supporter saying, wait, I didn't think you were gonna go after my wife. Or hold on a second. And I immediately get so many people who comment to me in my DMs who say they deserve it. Good for them. Like you said, what do they think was going to happen? There's a famous Reddit, leopards eating people's faces. They didn't
Yeah,
think the
yeah.
leopard was going to eat their face, right? So, but what I think is important as the sort of jumping off point in the conversation the Democrats are having is like, okay, how do you build those coalitions that you're talking about? And I always think about, formative my age is Obama, right? And I think about the Big Ten. And then I think if you're going to win elections in the future, you're going to have to bring back Trump supporters. So sometimes I do think that, like, especially after the election, the way we saw people being like, screw you, you deserve it if you voted for Trump. I do think
Yeah.
that to win elections, you're going to have to bring these people back. So once people are done saying like this is your fault, there has to be some level of saying, look, this is
Yeah.
what's going on, and this is the future. And I mean, look, we did focus groups at the Bulwark that I wrote about, but I saw this in other focus groups too that I had access to, which was Latino men, right, in Arizona, and half of them who voted for Trump in November were already saying, "I regret my vote."
Yeah.
And so the moderator's like, "Okay, well, why did you vote for him?" Well, he said, "I thought he was going to fix the economy, and I thought he was going to help my family, right?" And this was construction workers and furniture delivery guys. This was workers.
Yeah.
And then they said, not only is he not helping the economy, he's doing tariffs. And on top of that, immigration is like the second issue. And that's what I think is important. People always say, what's the number one issue? Yeah, immigration is not in polls normally the number one issue, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it can be second or third or fourth or fifth. But what I saw in these focus groups, and I think is important to watch, is that the economy, number one issue. They're pissed. But then they're saying, oh, on top of that, I don't like what he's doing with immigrants.
Yeah.
He didn't say he was going to do, I thought he was going to go after criminals. And that is where I will not defend these Latino Trump supporters, but I will just throw out this bit of context. There was a bait and switch, and he did it to all Americans. if you were listening to certain conversations, we're getting all of them out. Every single immigrant's out. If you were listening to other conversations from the MAGA leadership, they were saying it's just criminals. We're starting with criminals. And by the way, if you look at Pew research numbers, 97% of Americans support getting criminals out. That's not a controversial thing. Okay. But then after that, only 5% of people in the middle, not MAGA, not open borders, people in the middle, which is many Americans, only 5% support deporting the spouse of a U.S. citizen. Why would you need to deport the spouse of a U.S. citizen? Why would you need to deport these workers? So I totally get you on these conversations. I can only imagine with you having millions of followers, all the incoming that you get and how it can be frustrating. But these are these interesting conversations as we move forward.
Yeah, and I mean, it is a delicate balance to strike because part of me, like, for example, going back to this case where, so I get a lot of these videos of like, people asking me for help, and this, girl, she's about my age, makes a video, she's crying. My dad's got detained by ICE, and I need help getting him out, and everyone's just tagging me in it, and I was like, I was, gonna respond and try to see how I could help out. And then while I was working on that video, it came out like her old videos, like in November, she had posted about supporting Trump. And then I'm like, in this, because the human part of me, I'm like, okay, I want to help, but I'm like, this is what you voted for at some point. It's like, it's kind of like your parents, when like, you know, when you're learning, your parents tell you not to do something and you still do it. And your parents, o sea, así vas a aprender. Like, that's the only way you're going to learn. And I kind of see it in that way. Like, some people just, it might sound messed up, but just need
Yeah.
to see the consequences of their own actions. And if
Yeah.
that means your dad being deported, then it means, I mean, not saying, hey, I want your dad to be deported, but
Yeah.
you can't go and expect other people to help you when you put
Yeah.
yourself in this situation. That being said, how can we move forward? Because if we just shame everyone who voted for Trump, then we're not going to
Yeah.
build the coalitions we need to come back. So, like, how do we
Yeah.
strike that balance of like, and for me, that's why I think, hey, before you ask for my help or my support, at least recognize that you were wrong. Now,
Yeah.
then from there, like, everyone makes mistakes, right? Some mistakes are bigger than other. I think voting for Donald Trump is a pretty big mistake, but okay, the past is the past, but how can we move forward from here?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then also, how can we also realize that there are genuine reasons why people not necessarily voted for Trump but didn't vote Democrats. That was the biggest issue I saw. I saw very few like hardcore Latino like Republicans or Trump MAGA people. Obviously there were some, but what I saw more of was Latinos who were disillusioned with the Democrats and just didn't want to go out to vote, or they just thought, hey, I'm just gonna sit this one out. I thought that was the biggest problem this election cycle. And how do we, bring hope back to a lot of these people? I think part of it is showing the reality, because we get very complacent. We say, oh, things are bad, but things can always get worse. And that's what I tell people. Hey, Kamala's not going to come and fix all your issues, but your issues are going to be much worse if Donald Trump. And it's about relativity. Do you want to be, you want to be all right, or you want to be in the mud, horrible like we are right now with Donald Trump? And, we just need to do that work. And I think another thing that's really missing that few people understand, which I've really grasped, is the lack of messaging there is in Spanish. There's so much misinformation, disinformation, right wing, conspiracy theories. Like, I met so many people who voted for Donald Trump based on conspiracy theories. They thought, I don't know, like some insane stuff that I can't even get into without it being like, this is so
Yeah.
absurd. It's not
Yeah.
even worth bringing up. And I think we need to do a better job, doing that messaging in Spanish. That's
Yeah.
why many people ask me, Carlos, you have, 13 million followers. Why don't you do more content in English? And I'm like, I just think there's so much to do in Spanish. That's why
Yeah.
I only do stuff in Spanish, because it's such a
Yeah.
vacuum that exists that it's
Yeah.
really like me and a few other, people doing the pro, democracy side of things, but there's a lot more of the, right wing conspiracy theories and all that. You see it on WhatsApp,
Yeah.
you see it on Facebook, you see it everywhere. And how do we combat that? Because that also had a role in the election.
Everything you said, I really love it, and I'm really loving this conversation. I just want to also say, and I know you know this, but it's so important to underline because you talked about it. The people they're going after can't vote, and we need to talk about how messed up the mass deportation operation is, and it's built on our messed up system, right? You exploit people for their labor, for their cheap labor. You say you're going after criminals, and then you start raiding garment districts and hatching, traps outside Home Depot and different things in LA. And it's just so important to note that, right? Because you have people who are working here 10, 15, 20 years. I have a story coming out tomorrow, and I was looking at the New York undocumented people. I'm a New Yorker. I'm from New York, right? Like, and I started looking at these numbers from these reports: 400,000 undocumented in New York City, 1 million people in mixed status families, 265,000 of that million are children, and 80% of those children are US citizens. Like, we have these conversations and we act like it's just the farm worker or whatever. And by the way, as we know, the farm worker puts the food on our table. And so it's just such a messed up system. And then it's the administration with their cruelty, with their statements saying we're getting these illegals out of the country. And as you and I both know, these are real people with
Yeah.
real stories, and it's extremely messed up. The man that I was talking about, the worker, I didn't have his name because he had been pulled up in that initial LA ICE raid, and his daughter was, a grad student, and she was incredible. And she said he put all of the daughters through college, and that he was their emotional and financial support, right? That he had worked when they went through their dance phase, he paid for dance. When they went through their soccer phase, he paid for all their expensive soccer gear. And that's what pisses me off, right? When I first did that story, I was like a little sad seeing the videos, and I don't know, I would love to talk about your mental state when you see this stuff. And I was just feeling empathy and compassion and feeling horrible about what I was seeing. And I did this story about the amazing Latino journalists that were braving rubber bullets and tear gas in LA. And most of them were women. Jorge Ramos too. He made his comeback. But most of them were women. Okay.
Mhm.
And so first I was sort of emotional. And then when they body slammed Senator Alex Padilla on the ground, then I got angry again. Right. So it's this constant up and down. And as Latinos, and I wrote this in my piece, it can be hard, man. Like, I'm a journalist, put it on my shoulders. I'm down. I'm down for the pressure. I'm down for the stress. But eventually, these stories of people that look like us, that sound like us, it is messed up. And so I was curious, and you can take it anywhere else after that. But like, how do you deal with this? I mean, it's story after story from millions of followers. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, the way I see it is like, if the people that I speak to and support are able to make it through this administration, I mean, what I'm doing is the least of it. Obviously, it is a lot of work covering everything and exposing it and whatever. But I think it's harder, being undocumented and being afraid to go to school or being afraid to go to work. I mean, that for me is real, pressure, real worries. I have, the privilege of having been born a United States citizen, and that's why for me it's like, yeah, it's hard. Yeah, it's heartbreaking, but at the end of the day, someone has to do this work, and those of us who are able to do it without the risk of, I mean, I've told people I know if I was doing what I'm doing right now and I had any status that wasn't U.S. citizenship, I'm pretty sure, they'd be after me right now just because they've done the same to other people. So I'm like, I have to use that privilege in one way or another, and also the influence that I have to shift the conversation because I think there are genuine critiques to be made about the immigration system on both sides. And one of the things I try to tell people is, I make content always trying, to highlight the positive, but then also educate the community. And one of the biggest things that I've said for many years now, even when Biden was president and before, at the end of the day, we have to understand, that as immigrants, as children of immigrants, we are accountable. Whatever I do is going to reflect badly, not only on me, it's going to reflect on millions of people because that's the media landscape that we work in. If I do something, Donald Trump's going to put it, oh, look at these immigrants doing this and that. So I think we need to do a better job of holding each other accountable as saying, hey, we need to highlight these positive, hardworking people and stories. But at the same time, we shouldn't enable, I think having, drinking and driving every weekend. I'm like, hey, maybe you shouldn't be doing that because it makes all of us look bad. And if someone gets detained, like I think the narrative at one point got to like there should be no deportations at all. And I think that really lost a lot of people because I personally think, hey, yes, you should be rewarded if you come, you work hard, you do things, whatever. But if you're beating your wife every week and if you're drinking and driving, if you're, then yeah, there should be consequences. And I think that's a very common sense solution. that in many ways, I guess the Democratic Party strayed away from and led to this massive wave of, oh, we got to get everyone out because, Democrats have become too soft. And the Democrats' position has always been, yes, there needs to be hardline immigration policies for people who actually, commit serious crimes. They're committing abuse, theft, whatever. But then we should also reward those who are, working hard, paying taxes. I've been here for many years, doing things, as best as they can. So I think the narrative is much more nuanced than, deport everyone or don't deport anyone. It's like there is a middle ground, and I
Yeah.
think that's where most people are at. And I think that's what really led to this swing, in sentiment that we're now dealing with.
Carlos, let me ask you, because for people who don't know, you have worked with Democrats. There's this,
Mm.
like, crazy to me when I saw it, TikTok of you with former President Biden when he was announcing something he wanted to do on immigration, and you're there, not just like shaking his hand, but telling him the story
Yeah.
of the people who tell you their stories, and you got emotional. It's really cool. If people haven't seen it, they should go check it out. But the question I want to ask you, and I think you're going to enjoy this, is like, look, you work with Democrats.
Yeah.
They don't have millions of followers like you. So I understand that when they partner with you, you have that amplification.
Yeah.
They don't, okay? But along those lines, Democrats also need to work on how they get their message out, right? And we've seen this. There's been all these conversation podcasts, the manosphere and everything. So if you could tell me, what would you like to see from the folks you've worked with, from the stuff you've seen behind the scenes? What do they need to do better? They can't magically have 20 million followers tomorrow, but what can they do better to speak to people more directly to the issues that people are facing?
See, this is like a very, complicated question to answer because I think communication skills, obviously, there's things that can be coached and can be learned, and, social media as well. But there is a degree to it. If it's just like, if you have it, you have it. And if you don't, you don't. In the sense of like, for example, I love soccer and I can train 25 hours a day, but I'm never gonna be Messi. Why? Because I'm just not Messi. I'm not built like him. I'm never gonna be Messi. And I think we've fallen into this trap to thinking like, yes, there are politicians and communicators who will do well on social media, but when you have someone who you can clearly tell has no idea how social media works, clearly that's not their era. Why? Because they were born in a time, they were born 60 years before the first iPhone ever was created. Like, we don't have to force that guy to be on social media because that's just not how it works. You have to know who's a good fit. People like AOC, why is she so good on communicating? Because it's genuine. She doesn't have to like try to learn how, because she grew up in this era. And that's where we have
Mhm.
the uncomfortable conversation that many
Yeah,
people get, kind of iffy about. I think we just need, younger people who understand genuinely how social media works, who understand how communication works nowadays. Not to say, oh, if you're over a certain age, you shouldn't be in Congress. That's not what I'm saying. I think we just need a little bit more diversity on the age front and people who just bring their genuine experience on how
mm,
communication works. Because I mean, I just don't think I can coach someone like, yeah, I'm not going to say any names, but someone who's been in Congress for 40 years and has a system of how they do their communications.
mm,
I'm not going to, I can work with them every single day. They're not going to become a TikTok influencer, social media star because why? It doesn't come off as genuine. They're not really going to enjoy it either because that's not what they're used to doing.
yeah,
They just don't, and that's okay. We have to understand some people's skill sets are these and other people's skill sets are different.
yeah,
And that's my conclusion of it. Now, definitely on the messaging front, like, what is the general message of the Democratic Party? That's like a bigger conversation to be had. But what I've told many people is like, we talk a lot about, oh, Kamala raised X amount of or what, $1 billion or whatever it was. But if fundamentally the message that you're putting out there is not one that resonates with voters, then you can put 1 billion, 2 billion, 5 billion, and it's still not going to win you an election.
yeah,
Now, I don't think we have time to go down like what are the messagings that worked for
yeah.
Democrats, what didn't work. But I think overall, like on the content creator side of it, that's my honest analysis after doing
I
a lot
love
of
that.
work with different members of
Yeah.
Congress and other people. It's just um yeah.
I got two things out of that before I go to authenticity. What I got out of that is, number one, you're the Messi of social media, which I love.
Well, no,
You're basically the Leo Messi of
Messi something. But yeah, no, I appreciate
And I
that.
also got out of that you're not going to be doing a TikTok dance with a old congressman. or an old senator.
Yeah.
You don't think
Well,
that
I'm not
that's a
even
good
gonna like for example, so like I'm not even gonna do a TikTok dance with myself. Why? Because like so that's like the thing so many people don't like, especially when you're explaining it to people who don't understand social media. Like everyone has their own niche and everyone like my thing is giving news, information,
Yeah.
politics in Spanish. I mean, I can go and like, dance with Biden, let's say hypothetically, and it
Yeah.
would go viral, but for the wrong reasons because why? Like, what the
Mhm.
hell's going on here? You have like this is just so unserious. So what is that? Does
Yeah.
that do more harm than good? And I think the way we measure success on social media, many people think, oh, if something got a lot of views, it's good. But if all the comments are saying, oh, this is so stupid, don't ever do this again,
Yeah.
then you move the needle, yeah, but in the wrong direction. So that's why sometimes I'm like, hey, there's just some people who just should just sit this one out and like, let people who actually, and I'm saying there are people who have that potential to grow into it and find their voice and whatever, but there's just some other, people who just don't have it. And that's
Yeah.
okay. Everyone has different skill sets. I can't, you know, maybe do a sit down interview on television as well as some of the other more experienced people can, but I can do a better video. And like, how can we complement each other?
Yeah. And actually I love that about your style. If people have not seen it, if you don't speak Spanish, I understand. But like you should even just watch Carlos' delivery where he just says like breaking news, in Spanish. Like it's so good. What I did want to say about authenticity
Mm.
is like I'm a huge Bad Bunny fan, and he's the Puerto Rican mega star, and he's sort of like, there's Taylor Swift, there's Beyonce, and there's like, Bad Bunny. But like what I've always loved about him and I've wanted to write about is he is himself. He doesn't stand up on stage and say, I represent 50 million Latinos. He doesn't believe that. That's not where he's coming from. He says, I'm Puerto Rican and this is my background.
Mm.
And because of the way that he is authentic, people respond to that. People say, I like this guy. And he's got fans from all over, different countries, Germany. I went to Puerto Rico one time when his Un Verano Sin Ti album had come out, and the captain on a boat was like, what music do you want to hear? And I was like, Bad Bunny. And he was like, when people come from Germany, when people come from China, I ask them what they want to hear, and they say
Yeah.
Bad Bunny, right? So I've always thought that that's such a key part. He does an album, it's about Puerto Rico. He does a tour, he's doing a residency in Puerto Rico. And that's so powerful because the guy could go to Spain, the guy could go to Europe, the guy could do a world tour and make tons and tons of money. But that I feel my sister and I have talked about this. She's a therapist, and we've been like, why? What is that secret sauce? And it's just the authenticity. And it's something you're touching on. You are yourself. You're not trying to be other TikTok creators. You're trying to be yourself.
And there's a
And
point on that
yep,
I wanted to mention because I'm reading the comments. I don't know if you read,
yeah,
because I'm
yeah,
used to doing lives,
yeah,
and I just always read the comment. So someone pulled out a good example. They're like, well, age is not the only factor because look at Bernie Sanders. He's like
yeah,
very likable, and I think that's why age plays a role, but you can still, be an older person and be very good at social media, or you can be a young person and be horrible at it. And that it comes down to what you're saying about authenticity. What do, Bernie and AOC both have? There's a big age gap, but they're both
yeah,
authentic. They're not,
yeah,
trying. I, at least to my knowledge, I've never seen, Bernie Sanders go and try to dance on TikTok. Why? Because that's not what he does. For example, there are some politicians that are good at it. Like I saw a video of Kamala Harris dancing, and I'm like, why? Because she can actually dance. Like that's
yeah,
authentic to her.
yeah,
So it's
yeah,
more about not so much of like, oh, obviously there are factors that play a role, but the bigger issue is like, if you get someone I don't know, to start doing stuff that's not authentic to them, thinking that's the trendy thing or like that's what they should be doing, it just doesn't work. So I think the best social media strategy is to just be yourself, and then
yeah,
the audience will decide if they like you or if they don't like you. That's like the free
yeah.
market of social media, and that's just how it works. If you're yourself, if people connect with you, whatever that may be, whatever it is that you have that other people don't have, I think that's the path to success.
Carlos, I was really excited to do this and I really respect you, but it's been even better than I thought. And like, just by virtue, you're such an intelligent dude, but you're so tapped in. I really have loved this. I hope we can do it again. I think we could keep talking, in the future for sure. And I'm really excited for you, man. I think that like you have all these followers and all these places where people are, but I think to be here and to open up to a new audience and to get people to know you and your work, man. So I'm really excited for you going forward. And thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, no, and thank you. And those for, I guess, one last like reintroduction because Yeah, for those who don't know, my name is Carlos Eduardo Espina. I make content on social media, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and now on Substack. I am the most followed Latino. What would be my title? I don't know, like community activist, whatever. I make news content, politics content, all in Spanish for Latinos here in the U.S. I have nearly 13 million followers on TikTok, 3.5 million on Facebook, and 1.5 million on Instagram. And now I'm here on Substack because everyone's been telling me how awesome Substack is, the great community there is here, and just also how you can really just post stuff unfiltered without having to censor, just really what's going on under this administration. So I decided to join Substack, and here I am. A little bit of my background too. I'm half Uruguayan, half Mexican. My dad's from Uruguay, my mom's from Mexico. Been in the U.S. my whole life. Went to Vassar College in New York. Went to law school at UNLV in Las Vegas, and now I live in Houston, Texas. So yeah,
Yep.
that's the quick reintroduction. And people are asking my Substack name. I think it's just my name, right? Carlos Eduardo Espina. I don't know how.
Mhm.
I think if you click,
Yeah.
my name should be somewhere on here. But yeah,
Yeah.
just Carlos Eduardo Espina.
And everybody, please continue reading Huddled Masses, my newsletter for the Bulwark. It's just like really exciting to be able to tell national stories and sort of distill them to like really interesting sides of it. Yesterday, I wrote about the Dodgers not speaking up in LA. They are such a respected, iconic franchise. And the best was a radio host said, when we buy your tickets, you don't check people's documentation. You just take our money. They said, but now you won't speak up, right?
Yeah.
And so fascinating stuff. The discourse continues. Carlos, thank you so much for having me, man.
No, and thank you. Hopefully we can do it again. I love the work that you do. Thank you for having me on here, because you're the big fish here on Substack. So thank you for giving me the time and opportunity to speak to your audience as well. Hopefully we can repeat this, and we'll stay in touch. Un abrazo.
All right, gracias.
Ahí estamos. Cuídate. Yeah, bye.